the Second World War marked the dramatic end of the battleship era, a shift that took many naval strategists by surprise. For decades, battleships were the pride of every navy, symbols of national power and the deciding factor in any major maritime confrontation. Their massive guns, thick armor, and imposing silhouettes defined naval strength. Yet by 1939, the foundations of their dominance were already cracking. To understand why, we must look backward. During World War I, battleships did not deliver the decisive results expected of them. The great fleets of Britain and Germany clashed only once in a truly large engagement, the 1916 Battle of Jutland, and even that inconclusive fight failed to justify the enormous cost of constructing and maintaining these steel giants. The fear of losing such valuable ships often kept admirals from risking them, turning them into tools of deterrence rather than instruments of active warfare. After 1918, the world's naval powers faced a new dilemma: continue an expensive arms race or impose limits to prevent ruinous escalation. The result was the 1922 Washington Naval Treaty, a political earthquake that froze battleship development for nearly 15 years. Strict tonnage caps, gun limits, and construction freezes meant that the world entered the Second World War with fleets largely built before or shortly after World War I. Most nations modernized existing ships, but few built entirely new designs. This created a strange situation. In 1939, battleships were still seen as the core of naval power, yet they were already technologically outdated. At the same time, another force was rising: naval aviation. Early experiments in the 1920s showed that aircraft could strike battleships from above, bypassing their thick armor. Skeptics argued that those tests were unrealistic because the ships were stationary, but the seeds of a revolution had been planted. By the beginning of World War II, the world's most perceptive strategists could sense the shift coming, even if many admirals refused to accept it. The decisive moment arrived in the Pacific. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 exposed the vulnerability of even the most modern battleships when confronted by coordinated air power. Japanese carrier aircraft destroyed or crippled much of the US Pacific Fleet's battle line in a single morning. It was a brutal demonstration of the new reality. A plane carrying a bomb or torpedo could strike farther and harder than any naval gun. For the first time, a nation realized that control of the sea no longer depended on the range of a battleship's artillery, but on the reach of its aircraft. The shift became undeniable in 1942 and 1943, as aircraft carriers proved capable not only of damaging battleships, but of replacing them entirely as the primary offensive weapon at sea. As World War II progressed, the strategic value of the battleship declined even further, not because these ships suddenly became weaker, but because every other factor on the battlefield evolved faster than they could adapt. A battleship's power relied on its ability to project force through long-range artillery, yet aircraft now exceeded that range by hundreds of kilometers. This shift meant that even the most heavily armored ship was vulnerable long before it could return fire. The Mediterranean and Pacific theaters provided harsh demonstrations of this new reality. In 1941, British aircraft from the carrier Ark Royal disabled the German battleship Bismarck, sealing its fate. That same year in the Mediterranean, the British Fleet Air Arm crippled the Italian battle fleet at Taranto, using outdated biplanes. These events sent shockwaves through naval doctrine. If slow, lightly armed aircraft could neutralize top-tier battleships, then what could modern carrier groups accomplish? As the war expanded, the sheer scale of air power became overwhelming. Carrier task forces could launch dozens or even hundreds of aircraft in coordinated strikes, something no battleship could survive alone. While battleships had impressive anti-aircraft defenses, they were never designed to withstand swarm attacks from multiple directions at long distances. Even the most modern vessels, such as the Japanese Yamato and Musashi, became symbols of obsolescence. Despite their enormous guns and near-impenetrable armor, both were sunk by massed American carrier aircraft, proving beyond doubt that the battleship had lost its dominance. The psychological impact of these losses was just as powerful as the tactical one. Navies realized that speed, flexibility, and striking range had become the new measures of maritime power. A battleship required enormous resources, large crews, and constant escort protection just to survive. A carrier, by contrast, projected exponential firepower through its air wing and could strike targets far beyond the horizon. Even on the Atlantic front, where submarines were the primary threat, battleships played only limited roles. Convoys relied on escort carriers, destroyers, and advanced radar rather than big gun ships. By 1943, the strategic conversation had shifted completely. Future conflicts would be won not by armored hulls but by control of the skies above the ocean. This transition marked one of the fastest and most dramatic technological shifts in military history. Once the symbol of national pride, the battleship had become an expensive relic, still formidable in certain roles, but no longer the decisive instrument of sea power. The admirals who had believed in the supremacy of the battle line now faced an unavoidable truth. The ocean had become an air domain, and the age of big guns had yielded to the age of wings. By the final years of World War II, the battleship's fate was sealed not only by aviation, but by the changing strategic logic of global warfare. Nations recognized that industrial output, logistics, and technological adaptability mattered far more than the sheer tonnage of steel afloat. Battleships, with their massive fuel requirements and enormous crews, became liabilities rather than assets. Every hour a battleship sailed demanded resources that could instead fuel dozens of aircraft, multiple destroyers, or entire carrier groups. As the conflict intensified, armies and navies were forced to prioritize what delivered the greatest return on investment, and the battleship no longer fit that equation. Its artillery, once unmatched, was now outranged, outpaced, and outmaneuvered. Combat reports repeatedly demonstrated that wars were now decided by speed of response and flexibility, both at sea and in the air. Carrier-based air power could devastate enemy fleets, disrupt supply lines, and strike land targets with unmatched reach. In contrast, a battleship could only fire where it could sail, and even then, its targets needed to be within limited gun range. The Pacific War highlighted this shift dramatically. American carrier task forces roamed the ocean with unprecedented mobility, launching attacks across thousands of miles and reshaping entire campaigns in days. Japanese battleships, which represented some of the largest and most advanced ever built, rarely found decisive engagements where their big guns could matter. When Yamato sailed on its final mission in 1945, it never even saw an American ship. Instead, waves of carrier aircraft attacked relentlessly until the giant vessel capsized and sank, a clear sign that the era of surface duels had ended. Meanwhile, Allied naval planners increasingly used battleships in secondary roles, such as shore bombardment or escort duty, rather than as fleet flagships. Their heavy guns were useful for supporting amphibious operations, but they no longer determined the outcome of naval wars. Even in these roles, smaller ships and aircraft often performed more efficiently. Technological innovations like radar-guided bombing, submarine-launched torpedoes, and long-range maritime patrol aircraft further diminished any remaining advantage battleships once held. After 1945, nearly every major navy in the world reached the same conclusion. Battleships were obsolete. They were expensive symbols of a bygone era, out of place in a world where aircraft dominated the sea, although a few remained in service. For years, due to political prestige or limited operational roles, none could reclaim the influence their predecessors once wielded. The shift was irreversible. The age of steel giants had ended, replaced by a new maritime order built on carriers, submarines, and air power. What had taken decades to build disappeared in just a few years of warfare.